trauma and grief really go hand in hand, right? I just did this podcast episode with a grief specialist, Dr. Kay Fontana, and we were discussing how grief and trauma are really the same thing. Like, grief is not just when somebody dies, right? Grief happens when you get married and your husband turns out to be abusive. Grief happens when you think that you've met this amazing guy and he's your knight in shining armor and he ends up sexually exploiting you or sex trafficking you. Grief happens when you trust someone to take care of finances, take care of what they say they're going to. Like, you trust them financially and they take all of your money. Grief happens when you move. Grief happens when you change jobs, if you get fired. Grief happens in so many different forms. And I actually never even thought of it that way before, right? Trauma is grief. Grief is traumatic, but grief is also trauma. And if you are human and walking around the world, you have trauma and you've experienced grief. Like she said, 100% of us have experienced grief and experienced trauma. So I'm just curious what you think is your biggest thing that you're grieving from.